The Living Gods by Darylis the Theologian. No other religion in all of Nirn can claim what the Dark Elves know as absolute truth. Their gods rule over them and walk among them, as real and as present as any other resident of Morrowind. From their seat of power in Mournhold's tribunal temple, the living gods of the tribunal guard and counsel their people. When necessary, they punish sin and error, but they also share their bounty with the greatest and least among us, each according to their needs. But who are the living gods? They are powerful dark elves who achieve divine status through superhuman discipline and virtue, and supernatural wisdom and insight. As the three god kings of Morrowind, they form the divine leadership of the Dunmeri nation. The three, Lord, Mother, and Wizard, are described below. Vivec, the warrior poet god and master of Morrowind, is perhaps the most popular of the three. He also tends to be the most public, and the people love him. His visage appears both beautiful and bloody at the same time, and he has made violence into an art form. Vivec, the warrior poet, has darker aspects associated with the primitive, ruthless impulses, such as lust and murder. Almalexia, also known as Mother Morrowind, is the patron of healers and teachers. She is the healing mother, the source of compassion and sympathy, the protector of the poor and the weak. Almalexia embodies the best of the Dunmeri culture and purpose. She exemplifies mercy, and her wisdom guides the Dark Elves in all of their daily affairs. Sothasil, the god of the world mechanism, is least known and the most hidden of the tribunal gods. Sometimes referred to as the Mystery of Morrowind, he is a magus and the patron of artificers and wizards. Perhaps the mightiest wizard in the land and certainly the wisest, he is considered to be the light of knowledge and the inspiration behind craft and sorcery. Together, the living gods are the pillars of the tribunal temple. They represent the power and discipline of the Dunmeri people, and rule with a combination of compassion and strict adherence to law and protocol. Varieties of faith, the Dark Elves. The Dunmer are descended from the Chimer, who are apostates of the Aldmeri's Daedra worship. As the Alessen reforms never took hold in Morrowind, their pantheon bears little resemblance to the rest of Tamriel. The Dark Elves' original religion was worship of several Daedric princes, the so-called Good Daedra, but that has been largely superseded by reverence for the living gods of the tribunal. Almalexia, Mother Morrowind. Most traces of Auriel disappeared from ancient Chimer legends during their so-called exodus, primarily due to that god's association and esteem with the Aldmeri. However, most aspects of Auriel that seem so important to the mortal races, namely immortality, historicity, and genealogy, have conveniently resurfaced in Almalexia, the most popular of Morrowind's divine tribunal. Vivec, Master of Morrowind. Warrior poet god of the Dunmer. Vivec is the invisible keeper of the Holy Land, ever vigilant against the dark gods of the volcano. He/she has saved the Dunmeri people from certain death on numerous occasions. Sothasil, Mystery of Morrowind. God of the Dunmer, Sothasil is the least known of the divine tribunal. He is said to be reshaping the world from his hidden clockwork city. The Good Daedra, Boethia, Prince of Plots, heralded by the prophet Veloth. Boethia is the original god ancestor of the Dark Elves. Through his/her illuminations, the eventual Chimer, or Changed Folk, renounced all ties to the Aldmer and founded a new nation based on Daedric principles. All manner of Dark Elven cultural advances are attributed to Boethia, from philosophy to magic to responsible architecture. Ancient Velothi allegories are uniformly heroic successes of Boethia over enemies of every type, serving as foundation stories of the Chimeri struggle, also known as the anticipation of Almalexia. Mephala, Androgyne. Mephala is the web spinner or spinner god. In Morrowind, he/she was the ancestor who taught the Chimer the skills they would need to evade their enemies or murder them in secret. Enemies were numerous in those days, since the Chimer were a small faction. He/she, along with Boethia, organized the clan systems that eventually became the basis for the Great Houses. He/she founded Morag Tong, also called the Anticipation of Vivec. Azura, goddess of dusk and dawn. Azura was the god ancestor who taught the Chimer the mysteries needed to be different than the Aldmer. Some of her more conventional teachings are sometimes attributed to Boethia. In the stories, Azura is often more a communal cosmic force for the race as a whole than an ancestor or a god, also known as the anticipation of Sotha Sil. The Missing God. Lorkhan, the Missing God. This creator, trickster, tester deity is in every Tamrielic mythic tradition. His most popular name is the Aldmeri Lorkhan or Doomdrum. He convinced or contrived the original spirits to bring about the creation of the mortal plane. This upset the status quo, much like his father, Padome, who introduced instability into the universe in the beginning place. After the world is materialized, Lorkhan is separated from his divine center, sometimes involuntarily, and eventually wanders the creation of the At'ata. He and his metaphysical placement in the scheme of things is interpreted in a variety of ways. In Morrowind, he is a being related to the Psijic endeavor, a process by which mortals are charged with transcending the gods that created them. Four corners of the House of Troubles, also known as testing gods, enemy gods, more to be placated and appeased than worshipped. Molag Bal, god of schemes and lord of brutality. Daedric power of much importance in Morrowind. There, he is always the arch-enemy of Boethia, the prince of plots. He is the main source of the obstacles to the Dunmer and the preceding Chimer people. In legends, Molag Bal always tries to upset the bloodlines of the great houses or otherwise ruin Dunmeri purity. A race of super monsters, said to live in Molag Amur, are the result of his seduction of Vivec during the previous era. Malakath, the god of curses. In Dunmer myth, Boethia swallowed Aldmer hero god Trinimac and excreted him as Malakath. A somewhat weak but vengeful Daedra, the Dark Elves say he is also Malak, the god king of the orcs. He always tests the Dunmer for physical weakness. Sheogorath, the mad god. The fearful obeisance of Sheogorath is widespread, and it is found in most Tamrielic quarters. Contemporary sources indicate that his roots are in Aldmeri creation stories. Therein, he is born when Lorkhan's divine spark is removed. One crucial myth calls him the Sithis-shaped hole of the world. He tests the Dunmer for mental weakness and tempts the great houses into treachery against each other. Mehrunes Dagon, the god of destruction. Popular Daedric power, he is associated with natural dangers like fire, earthquakes, and floods. In some cultures, Dagon is merely a god of bloodshed and betrayal. He is an especially important deity in Morrowind, where he represents its near, inhospitable terrain. Testimonials on Mushroom Towers. The Telvanni, the most mysterious of the great houses in all respects, features one of the most looming curiosities, both literally and figuratively, the mushroom structures in which they live and work within. The house has never given an official statement about their choice of architecture, and most are too frightened by Telvanni's vast power to ask. It's common knowledge that the Telvanni magisters value their privacy. But why not build a tower of stone or wood? I decided to ask the common folk their theories. Names have been changed to protect the speakers from Telvanni attention. I first talked to local merchants who weren't officially affiliated with the house, but often sell wares to its members. A rather exasperated dark elf named Verna was happy to explain her theory. It's the smell. That's what it is. They're obsessed with this three-forsaken stench. Can't get enough of it. I think there's something about their biology, something different from other dark elves. Makes them just crave the smell of mushrooms, so much that they matched them into towers. I heard they just sit up there all day and just inhale the fumes. Me? I just get headaches. What's wrong with the fresh scent of pine or stone or any other honest building material? Sometimes I think I'd rather see the towers made of silt-stride or dung than of moldy old mushrooms. An Argonian innkeeper, makes some waves, believed that the purpose was more functional. Well, we all know that the Telvanni are isolationists. They can't even be bothered to attend the inter-council meetings. My guess is that they eat the mushrooms to save on trips to the market. Only makes sense, doesn't it? Mushroom stew, mushroom pie, mushroom gravy. There's a lot you can make with bits of mushroom. We just don't notice it because our slaves gather the stuff discreetly. Wouldn't want to ruin their image by being mushroom fanatics, would they? Well, more fanatical, I suppose, than simply having your entire house built out of the stuff. A rather friendly dark elf merchant by the name of Hader had a vastly different opinion of what the mushrooms were used for. I've heard that the mushrooms are a powerful aphrodisiac. Really makes you wonder what those magisters do all day up in those towers. I've thought about taking up my own collection, for purely studious purposes, of course, but I'd rather not attract the attention of the homeowners. Telvanni mages aren't very giving dark elves, even when well pleased. And I suspect they might be pleased more often than they let on, if you catch my drift. By the way, you did say that you were changing my name for this, didn't you? The merchants who catered to Telvanni were interesting sources of material and raised many questions for me to consider. But I found myself drawn to those who worked directly for the house. Though most slaves were unwilling to speak to me, I found an orc hireling who had this to say. Well, who else is using the mushrooms? If they're there, they're there. Might as well make some use of them. Only useful decision the Telvanni ever made, truth be told. Maybe the truth was that simple. The Telvanni found this native flora and simply wished to make use of it. A matter of convenience seems to be the most plausible theory I had heard. But was it the truth? I had but one more source I could find who would speak their mind. A Khajiit trader by the name of Rumok, who explained, "This one always thought the towers were built to intimidate outlanders. Rumok was most unsettled when he set up his business, having such a strange tower looming above you. Perhaps it represents the Telvanni themselves, yes? Imposing, mysterious, almost haunting. The Telvanni do not wish to welcome ones such as us to their lands. It is in their best interest to keep us frightened." I could get no official comment from a member of the House Telvanni, other than a few strongly worded requests that I cease my inquiries. But my curiosity cannot be contained by mere threats, and the mystery of the Telvanni is something I will always find myself attempting to unravel. I take heart in the fact that even under the House's oppressive eye, so many shared with me their thoughts and theories, each one more interesting and thought-provoking than the last. Nerevar, moon and star. In ancient days, the deep elves and a great host of outlanders from the west came to steal the land of the Dunmeri. In that time, Nerevar was the great Khan and war leader of the House people, but he honored the ancient spirits and the tribal law, and became as one of us. So when Nerevar pledged upon his great ring of the ancestors, one clan under moon and star, to honor the ways of the spirits and rights of the land, all the tribes joined the House people to fight a great battle at Red Mountain. Though many Dunmer, tribesmen, and housemen died at Red Mountain, the Dwemer were defeated and their evil magics destroyed, and the outlanders driven from the land. But after this great victory, the power-hungry Khans of the great houses slew Nerevar in secret, and, setting themselves up as gods, neglected Nerevar's promises to the tribes. But it is said that Nerevar will come again with his ring, and cast down the false gods, and by the power of his ring will make good his promises to the tribes, to honor the spirits and drive the outsiders from the land. Red Mountain's might. Red Mountain grumbles like an angry giant. Its sides drip with a warrior's red, a slobbering beast before it lunges for the kill. I dream of its eruption, of billowing ash and spouting flames. I always wake in a cold sweat. My dark elf companions smirk at me when I speak of it. They talk of the power of their great god Vivec, of his might and glory and magic. I know of its magic, and I know of its end, of its limits. What is their idol's limit? I fear to find out. Rumors swirl around the mountain like the ashy wind. Legends, myth. But I've walked across Skyrim, where dragons once ruled. I am no stranger to the power of myth and the truth it holds. I am no stranger to the power of the true gods. When I mention the Heart of Shore, or Lorcan, as the Dark Elves know him, I'm met with laughter. There's something about seeing your god, about being his neighbor, that gives those in Vvardenfell a sense of entitlement. but what belief is to be had in what you can see. Faith is not given to what is provable in the world, but rather what can only be truly felt in your gut. Still, they tell me what they know, of greedy dark elf hands which found the heart, which used it for their own ends. A magical stone, some say, nothing more. What it was used for I do not know, or if it still exists. So goes the legends of a true god, which goes beyond mere mortal flesh. Some say the heart still lies beneath that great red tower, but my dark elf companions remain unusually silent on the matter. I hear stories of treasure hunters delving deep into the dark passages, of the screams that never reach the surface. I know in my heart that the great red mountain will never be defeated, will never give up its prize. Not until a true force of good emerges to claim it, or, perhaps, a true force of evil. A Tale of Vvardenfell. Hearken, young ones, and I'll tell you a tale. A long, long time ago, Sheogorath grew bored, which is a very dangerous thing to happen to a Daedric prince of madness. As is true of all the House of Troubles, he held no love in his heart, and so he did something very cruel. He took a mighty rock from the void that surrounds us, and flung it far, far, far toward Nirn. Now, Sheogorath didn't much care where this large rock would hit or what chaos it would cause. He simply wanted to see what it would do. Who was to stop this evil plan? Was it the divines, in all their good and wisdom? No, for they can do no more than offer false hope and hollow faith. Perhaps the Daedric princes, with all their power and enchantments. But no, neither mer nor man could offer enough to get these pitiful princes to face such a daunting challenge. And so it flew, and flew, and flew, and straight down it came to the most beautiful island in all of Nirn. It fell toward Vvardenfell. Many wept and wailed as it approached. The Ashlanders prayed to Azura, who did nothing. Men and mer prayed to the divines, who did nothing. But the Dark Elves, we prayed to the three, to our ever-glorious living gods, and Vivec heard our prayers. He raised his hand, calm and serene, glowing in his holy light, and the fall of the celestial rock became slower and slower and slower still. And all who wept and wailed stopped, for Vvardenfell had finally come to its resting place. Safely there, it hung in the air, above the spot where Vivec City would one day be built. Now you may ask, what wisdom was there in this? Why did not the great Vivec simply set this celestial rock softly down upon Nirn's verdant earth? But listen well, for there is a reason, as with all things the three do. Every day our faith is tested by Vvardenfell, and every day we show our love for Vivec and the tribunal by keeping it aloft. Because it is our love, our devotion, our faith in the tribunal that keeps it hovering above. It is proof of not only Vivec's might, but the love of his followers. And so forever it hangs, a reminder to all. Together now, praise Vivec, praise the three, Vivec and Mephala. Who is Almsivi? Morrowind is holy country, and its gods are flesh and blood. Collectively, these gods are called the Tribunal, the Triune Almsivi, three deities exemplifying Dunmeri virtues. Almalexia is mercy, Vivec is mastery, and Sothisil is mystery. Vivec is easily the most popular of them all. Vivec is also the most public, for he is the beloved warrior poet of the true people, paradoxically beautiful and bloody. Vivec is an artistic violence. Vivec is represented in temple literature and liturgy as one of the divine kings of Morrowind. He guards the sacred Velothi subcontinent of Vvardenfell, and stands guard over Red Mountain. He is part of the Holy Tribunal, a god of the New Temple, and an aspect of the blessed and righteous Almsivi. This explicit presentation of Vivec, the guardian god king and warrior poet, is one of the most accessible and familiar to Westerners. However, it is important to remember that Vivec is also known to the Dunmer as the transcendent evolution of the Daedra that anticipated him, Black Hand's Mephala, a foundation figure of the earliest Chimer. This darker side of Vivec does not appear in the popular literature and liturgy, but is instinctively understood and accepted by the Dunmer as an integral part of Vivec's divine aspect. A more complete appreciation of the complex nature of Vivec requires an understanding of the nature of Vivec's anticipation, Mephala, and the darker themes represented by the Daedra Lord's modes and motivations. Who is Mephala? Each of the 3 tribunes of the temple were represented in the dawn of Chimeric culture by their anticipations. These anticipations are known to the West as the sinister Daedra Lords Azura, Boethia, and Mephala. In temple theology, however, Azura is the anticipation of Sothasil, the mage lord of Omsivi. Boethia is the anticipation of Almalexia, Omsivi's mother and lady. Mephala is the anticipation of Vivec. According to legend, under the guidance of these 3 Daedra lords, a discontented throng of Altmer transformed themselves into a new people and founded a new land. And while Boethia, the so-called Prince of Plots, provided the revolutionary methods needed to bring about this transformation, Mephala was the shadowy implementer of those methods. As known in the West, Mephala is the demon of murder, sex, and secrets. All of these themes contain subtle aspects and violent ones. Assassination and genocide, courtship and orgy, tact and poetic truths. Mephala is understood paradoxically to contain and integrate these contradictory themes. And all these subtle undercurrents and contradictions are present in the Dunmeri concepts of Vivec, even if they are not explicitly described and explained in temple doctrine. The Dunmer do not envision Lord Vivec as a creature of murder, sex, and secrets. Rather, they conceive of Lord Vivec as a benevolent king, guardian warrior, poet-artist. But at the same time, unconsciously, they accept the notion of darker, hidden currents between Vivec's benevolent aspects. For example, one of the most striking persistent myths associated with Vivec is the story that Vivec conspired with his co-rulers Almalexia and Sothasil in the murder of Lord Nerevar, the greatest of Dunmer heroes and generals. The story is derived from Ashelander oral tradition, and is flatly contradicted by all temple traditions. Nonetheless, the tale is firmly established in the Dunmer imagination, as if to say, of course Vivec would never have conspired to murder Lord Nerevar. But it happened so long ago. Who can know the truth? The public face of Vivec is benign, sensitive, compassionate, and protective of his followers. At the same time, the Dunmers seem irrationally comfortable with the hidden aspects of Vivec, the darker components of violence, lust, and conspiracy associated with the more primitive and ruthless impulses of the anticipations. Daedra worship the Chimer. The history of Daedra worship by the elves, once known as the Chimer, provides a valuable object lesson in the dangers of traffic with the so-called Lords of Oblivion. It's a tale of peril that modern-day apologists for Daedric worship, such as Lady Cinnabar, would do well to heed. Let's begin with a few facts that not even the Shrew of Tanith could deny. The Daedra, the gods, the divines, created Nirn out of the chaos of Oblivion. They assumed the physical form within the mortal plane, the Mundus, and according to elven myth, were the direct ancestors of the Aldmeri. The Daedra were the natural objects of holy reverence for the elves of the Dawn era, and the first organized religions venerated these divines. However, after Nirn was born, the Daedra withdrew from their creation, becoming distant, aloof, and disinterested in the affairs of mortals. But beyond the Mundus, the infinite variation of Oblivion, there were other god-like entities of great power known as the Daedra, literally the not Daedra, who began to take a malign interest in the realm the Daedra had created. Some of the more powerful of these entities, the so-called Daedric princes, who ruled entire Oblivion planes of their own, were nonetheless jealous of the mortals of Nirn, for they had inherited the Daedric capacity of creation. This ability was beyond the Daedra, who, though masters of change and metamorphosis, create nothing new that has not been seen before. However, one quality the Daedric princes shared with the young mortals of Nirn was a lust for power in all its forms. The corrupting desire is the foundation of all mortal worship of the Daedra. The princes offer power in return for service and worship. Most often, this power comes in the form of knowledge, the most seductive and least perilous seeming of the Daedric temptations. To show how seductive this temptation can be, reflect upon the early Aldmer of Somerset. Though in their arrogance, they consider themselves the lineal descendants of the Daedra. Nonetheless, the first large-scale religious sect, espousing Daedra worship, was born in the heart of Somerset itself. There, in the rainbow shadow of the Crystal Tower, the so-called prophet Veloth communed with the Daedric prince Boethia and agreed to accept her gifts. He inscribed the Velothi prophecies, which expounded the doctrine worship of the good Daedra, Boethia, Azura, and Mephala, along with the ways to propitiate and negotiate with the bad Daedra, Molech Bal, Malakath, Sheogorath, and Maroon's Dagon. To the more foolish of the Somerset Aldmeri, the arts and skills the good Daedra offered to teach them seemed much more useful than the maxims and platitudes of the priests of the Daedra, and a number of elven clans accepted Veloth as their prophet and guide. When the Sabiarchs of Alinor rightfully prohibited the schism, Veloth led the clans loyal to him out of the Isles and across the seas to the far side of Tamriel, where they colonized the domain now known as Morrowind. The followers of Saint Veloth, who became known as the Chimer, were willing to trade the paradise of golden Somerset for the purgatory of ashen Morrowind, all in return for the illusionary gifts of the Daedra. The Chimer built mighty temples to Boethia, Azura, and Mephala, and established the traditions of worship in Morrowind that were later co-opted by the tribunal. As even the beginning student of history knows, this large-scale dabbling with Daedra led inevitably to warfare and catastrophe. Chimer civilization fell at the Battle of Red Mountain, and the curse of Azura, their erstwhile mistress, transformed the brilliant Chimer into the sullen and haunted Dunmer. After that time, Morrowind, under the tribunal, turned its back on worship of the Daedra, but by then the damage had already been done. Today, the Daedra are feared and abhorred across the length and breadth of Tamriel, and rightly so. Yet, despite the clear lessons of history, some misguided souls still insist that traffic with Daedra lords can be tolerated, even accepted. To those such as you, Lady Cinnabar, I say, beware. What pact with the Daedra ever ended well? Persistence of Daedric veneration. If you believed what the old goat Phrastus of Elnir writes in what he's pleased to call his histories, you'd think that modern society's bias against reverence for the Daedric princes was rooted in some kind of instinctive revulsion against the lores of oblivion, an abhorrence based on events of unspeakable cruelty that took place thousands of years ago. This is absurd on the face of it. Ask the peasant in his field, the cobbler in his shop, or the solicitor in his office if he fears the Daedra lords because of the ancient practices of the wild elves, and all you'll get will be a blank look. The peasant, cobbler, and solicitor only fear Daedra and Daedra worship because they've been told to by established religion and academia, and because their neighbors believe the same thing. So, Phrastus, Daedra worship survives in Tamriel only at the level of forbidden cults? On the contrary. It's easy to show that the veneration for Daedra is widespread and widely accepted among the folk of Tamriel, despite the desires and opinions of priests and professors. Ask the hunter why he mutters a prayer to her scene as he draws his bow. Ask the gardener why she asks Mephala to spare her vines from slugs and worms. Ask the guardsman why he invokes the valor of Boethia as he draws his sword. And one doesn't have to look hard to find worshippers of Sanguine during Carnival, or Hermaeus Mora among scholars at any time. What of the Ashlanders of Morrowind, who still venerate the so-called good Daedra? What of the spirit wardens of Menavia, who follow Azura? What of the jovial lambasters of Rimmen, who celebrate Clavicus Bile? What, indeed, of the Khajiit of the southern realms? Rather than abjure the Oblivion lords, the catfolk of elsewhere venerate them openly, scarcely drawing a distinction between Aedra and Daedra. The Khajiit recognize the benevolent aspects of the princes, offering them respect at a minimum, and often admiration. Azura is a popular object of worship for Khajiiti magicians. Sheogorath appeals to the feline taste for wild mischief, and the souls of the dead are placed in the charge of Namira. Yet Phrastus would have you believe that every mortal in Tamriel cringes in horror at the mention of Daedra, and mocks my own work when I showed him up for the charlatan that he is? Or can we explain his petty hostility in another way? Wasn't it Phrastus himself who approached me at the Dragonstar Conclave of Antiquarian Scholars? Phrastus who pointed out that it was the 16th of Sun's Dawn. Phrastus who suggested we meet later that evening to appropriately celebrate Sanguine's summoning day. I believe he took it rather personally when I refused his smarmy advances. For it was shortly thereafter that his unwarranted criticism of my work began to appear in the journals. Yes, perhaps therein lies the explanation. I hope you enjoyed these readings. If you'd like to follow this journey into the lore books of the Elder Scrolls, as well as other fantasy realms, please leave a like and consider subscribing. Should you have a request of a series or a certain fantasy topic, feel free to let me know in the comments.